Good evening, and welcome to the Friday webinars at Wharton Arts, a series dedicated to making authentic connections between art and life through the sharing of stories, expertise, and creations by guest artists. My name is Helen Cha-Pyo, Artistic Director of Wharton Arts, and the curator and the host of the Friday webinars at Wharton Arts series. Wharton Institute for the Performing Arts is comprised of New Jersey Youth Symphony, Patterson Music Project, and the Performing Arts School as New Jersey's largest non-for-profit performing arts education organization, serving over 1,200 students of all ages and abilities through a range of classes and ensembles. Tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome our speaker, Domhnaill Hernon. Domhnaill Hernon is an award-winning technology, innovation, and creativity executive. Mr. Hernon received an undergraduate degree in aeronautical engineering and a PhD in aerodynamics from the University of Limerick and an executive MBA from Dublin City University, Ireland. He previously led R&D organizations and developed and executed strategies to overcome the innovation valley of death. He is head of experiments in art and technology, E.A.T, which is a new initiative he founded to fuse art and engineering/science to develop solutions that humanize technology. Mr. Hernon's work has been featured in Wired magazine, Times Square, SXSW, NASDAQ, MWC, Ars Electronica, TEDx, and Inspire Fest. He advises innovation and cultural programs globally. And this evening's webinar is made possible in part by the Futures Fund of the League of American Orchestras. And the music that you heard right before the start of the webinar is actually a performance by Mr. Hernon himself. Before we hear from Mr. Hernon, here is a 1-minute trailer video for the documentary series called We Speak Music, a groundbreaking artistic collaboration between the international world-class beatboxer and visual artist Harry Jeff and Nokia Bell Labs. And immediately after that, we will hear a wonderful presentation from Mr. Hernon, and we will leave some room for our attendees of the webinar to ask questions. So maybe the last 15 minutes or so, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A chat box, and he will try to answer most of those questions. So here is the video trailer.
Everything that you think is possible with the voice is not the limit. There is something new here. There is something new happening.
And once we started to teach the young people, that's when we were like, wow.
Maybe beatboxing is giving us some glimpse of the human voice that might well have been something that predated language.
We're at the beginning of a new wave of research.
The time I've spent trying to be a machine, it seems like his work has the capacity to make a machine be like me.
We want you to close your eyes and be like, there's no way that a human being is doing that.
Working in collaboration with Nokia Bell Labs, now I'm going on a journey of discovery to understand more about this art form and how it's inspiring communities, scientists, and engineers alike.
Being alive means paying attention to the artists, engineers that are trying to say something.
Thanks for that very nice introduction, Helen. It's great to be here with everyone. I haven't seen that video clip for quite some time, so it kind of brings back good memories. And it's great to be part of the Wharton webinar series and for us to share some of the work we're doing. And this work actually takes place only a couple of blocks away from the Wharton School in New Providence. And in fact, the room that's in my background here on the Zoom call is a very special room at our facility at Bell Labs in New Providence, and I can talk a little bit more about that room in the Q&A if people are interested. So let me get to sharing some slides, and we can talk a little bit about the fusion of art and technology and why I believe that that is the future of innovation. Now let me see, my slides have magically gone missing on me in my Zoom exchange. So just give me 1 second. But that room in the background, while I'm trying to look for these slides, that room is actually a very famous room called an Anechoic Chamber. And it's a room where there's no reverberation in sound. So what happens is when you enter that space and you speak or you play music, your brain observes that experience in a very strange way, because your brains are so used to hearing reverberations of sound in the real world. And in that particular space, we get no reverberations in sound. And it's a very interesting experience to go through. So let me just see, for some reason, this has never happened to me before, but I cannot see my PowerPoint slides on the share function for the Zoom, which is interesting. Where are you gone? Okay, 1 second. Sorry about this, folks. I'm just going to close everything down. And what I'll just try and talk a little bit while I'm looking for these slides. The very interesting thing about that space is that it was built in 1947. And in fact, it held the Guinness World Record for the quietest room on Earth from 1947 till sometime in the 80s. And it's where a lot of new technology has been developed in terms of acoustics and new types of microphones, like the microphones that you all have in your cell phones and tablets were all designed and built in this room. And the whole concept of working psychoacoustics and how the brain interprets sound and how you transmit sound and receive sound, a lot of that, of the earliest, most pioneering work was done in this space. So it's an immense amount of history, and it's a really interesting room as well to be able to step into. So with all of that, thankfully, I was able to use the gift of the gab that is given to me as an Irish person to stall while I was trying to find my slides. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about my background. I think it's important that you know where I've come from so you get a sense of the beliefs I have about the future. I'm going to talk a little bit about the limitations of the scientific method and the engineering method. And, you know, you might find it strange that someone's even talking about the limitations of that, but I believe there are some that we need to acknowledge. I'm going to share some of my thoughts on the future of innovation, and in particularly how you fuse art and technology to create more human-centric technologies that should better humanity. I'm going to finish off then with some life lessons that are really kind of targeted more to the younger folks in the audience and some of the students of Wharton. And these are some things that I wish I was aware of when I was a little bit younger. So a bit of background, I'm from Ireland, as you can probably guess from the music that Helen played and from my accent. You know, if you Google search the village I grew up in, this is one of the first pictures you get. It was a tiny village in the countryside with just 150 people or so. But I did grow up in a very musical family. My father is a professional musician. He's the person playing what's called the button accordion there. Second from the left, that's me on the fiddle, my brother on the flute, and another person accompanying us on the bouzouki. And I grew up in this very musical family in a very musical region, and I grew up learning traditional Irish music mainly by ear and just learning to feel the music and learn from my father and learn from other musicians around me. So I know that Helen did play a little clip there of me from a bit of music I put on YouTube, but this is a track that I'll play a little bit of myself and my father playing on a recent family album that we released. So you get the point. So if you haven't heard Irish traditional music before, that's what it sounds like. That is a selection of reels that we recorded, and you can see it's very upbeat, quite fast. It's really kind of considered as dancing music, and traditionally music would have been played for dancers in a traditional Irish style of dancing. So that was kind of my upbringing. But then, and I spent a lot of my teens playing music all over Ireland and other places in the world, and it was really a great experience for me to meet new people and see differences in cultures across different nations in the world through the music I played. At a very young age, though, I became extremely interested in understanding how airplanes fly. Not to fly airplanes, I had no interest in being a pilot, but I really was interested in understanding the aerodynamics of airplanes, even though at that age I didn't even know what aerodynamics was. And it was this kind of thing here around fluid flow over different types of surfaces, whether it's aircraft wings or jet engines, that really got me inspired. And I did a PhD, an undergrad in aeronautical and a PhD in aerodynamics. And this was my world for a very long time. This is really a big part of my inspiration. At that time when I went to college, I kind of forgot about my musical upbringing a little bit. I became so kind of engrossed in this engineering world that I was in. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. To cut a very long story short, I was hired by Bell Labs in Dublin in Ireland. They had just created a new research lab outside of North America, and I ended up applying my knowledge of airflow to these things called heat sinks. And these are pieces of metal that you place on top of the computer chip in your computer, and they take the heat from the computer chip and move it to the outside airflow, which can be moved by a fan, typically in one of your computers. So I did a lot of work applying my knowledge of aerodynamics and 3D printing to how you create these new types of heatsink design. And then started kind of growing in my level of responsibility in the organization and started managing people and creating new research organizations, spent a lot of time in eco-sustainability generally, looking at energy efficient ways to develop batteries or to harvest energy to power sensors or to create these various thermal solutions to remove heat from our equipment. From that, then I moved to the States a little over 5 years ago, and I ended up leading large initiatives to build out technology showcases. And really, this is very exciting work. This is about how do you present to someone today what the future will be. So how do you predict the future in 5 or 7 years' time, how technology will operate, the intersection between technology and humanity, and how do you build solutions today that can prove the validity of your prediction for the future, and how might you convince others, especially in a company like ours, how do you convince executives and people on the product side that your vision of the future is correct and that they should invest in it. So I was very excited in that kind of work in innovation and proving out and de-risking these types of concepts. And I spent a lot of time working across a range of different research areas, from audio visual to photonics, all these kind of things. Doesn't really matter what they are. If you're interested, I can share more in the Q&A. And then I kind of went deep into this world of how do you take an idea? How do you take creativity concepts? How do you build proof of concepts in a lab environment? And how do you turn those proof of concepts and those ideas into a product that can be tested at scale in the field and that will be brought to market? So we did a lot of work on various things like drone deployed, small cells. So a small cell is a type of telecommunications equipment that gives you access to the cellular network. We worked on different communication apps. We developed a whole new range of different wearable devices. I'm not going to go into these at all in this talk, but just to let you know that I've kind of been very privileged to work across research, technology, product development and innovation in a very broad way, and it's really informed my thinking. And more recently, and I'm going to talk about this at length, you know, I've got into this world of fusing art and technology. So bringing artists and creative and musicians together with our engineers, our scientists, and then trying to bring those two different modes of creativity into one place, and then seeing how we can develop human-centric technology because of that fusion. And I'll talk about that at length. Now, the reason I talked a little bit about my background, one is to give you a sense, if you're a student, to say that you should never allow yourself to be pigeonholed into just thinking you can do only one thing. And I think you can learn so much if you embrace challenging yourself in these different areas. And I think it'll help you a lot if you can kind of think about doing that. But the other reason is to say that the things I'm going to talk about and the limitations of engineering and the science method in the following slide comes directly from my vast experience being an engineer, working with scientists in technology companies, but also how I've worked with academics and startups and other big companies, and how I understand the way we are trained as engineers and scientists and the limitations of that, and how we are expected to apply that knowledge to industry and to business to generate revenue for these companies. So this is in simplistic terms, my view or my description of the engineer, the scientist, and largely the designer as well. So I believe that 99.9% of the population of engineers and scientists can be described this way. And the description is that the way we as an engineer solve problems is that we're reductionist, linear, and logical in our approach. So reductionist means we start with a problem of a certain size, we break it down into its much smaller solvable chunks, and then we only focus on solving that one part of the problem. Linear and logical means that an engineer or scientist can tell you that they go from A to D in the alphabet, as an example, by passing through B and C. Linear, logical, reductionist approach. And the scientific method described this way has done great things for humanity. I mean, think about the progression of humanity through the development of technology for the last few hundred years. So there's no denying that there's great power in that scientific method. And I was trained in this method, and I have applied this method, and most of my colleagues in the tech world and other industries apply this type of method. Now, what happened was a number of years ago, what happened to me was I was exposed to various conversations with many different artists in New York around 4 years ago. And every one of those conversations blew my mind. I realized that as much education as I had and as much experience I had in industry and in a tech company, that the artistic mind had an extremely, totally different way of thinking about the world, the intersection of humanity and technology, more philosophical approach, a more human-centric approach. And I couldn't believe that I wasn't aware of these different ways of thinking. And when I've worked with the artistic community, this is my simplistic description of the way that they operate. And again, I would just say that this represents 99.9% of that population. Now, before I go any further, some of you might say, well, I disagree with this framing because I'm an engineer and I'm an artist and I clearly sit between two. And if that's the case, great. I work with some people that are hybrids that operate in both these modes, but you are a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall global population. I'm kind of talking about models that describe the masses. So with an artist or a creative, they start with a problem of a certain small size, and out of that, they can create a universe of opportunity. So their thinking is very expansionist and very divergent in its approach. And from the perspective of an engineer or scientist, they go about thinking about these problems in a very non-linear and illogical way. So for example, as a toy example, if you asked an artist, how do you go from A to D? They might mention every letter in the alphabet and never even discuss B and C. Now, these differences are as different as you can get across any two disciplines in the world as far as I'm concerned. And because of those inherent differences, there's a lot of tension between bringing these worlds together, and these worlds often don't mix well. And the program that I founded and developed in Bell Labs was to formalize techniques to overcome those barriers and to bring these worlds together, and then to explore what kind of value we could bring around the fusion of art and technology. So in my view, after a few years doing this, and I think the program has been quite successful, and I'll give you examples of the success we've had, I believe that when you bring these two worlds together, you have this holistic, coherent approach that looks at the world's problems in a holistic way, looks to develop solutions in a very human-centric and holistic way, and that the sum of the combination of these is far greater than either on their own. And at that interface of these two worlds, or at the collision of these two worlds, is where absolute magic occurs. And I want to give you a sense of some of that magic that I've experienced. And then another way that I've started thinking about this is that the engineer and scientific approach kind of can model the physical and the conscious mind. But then when you look at the artist and the creative, they can bring the metaphysical and the unconscious soul to this. So it's really a melding of mind, heart, soul in this holistic way of thinking about problems in the world. This has been very exciting for me to come up with ways to bring these worlds together to overcome the inherent barriers that exist, and then to see how we can take our technology in totally new directions because of these collaborations. So I want to give you some examples, and I want to root the examples in topics that you're probably very aware of because you read about them and hear about them in the news, and they're kind of buzzy topics, and some people are excited about them if you're in technology, and some people on the consumer side are worried about these technologies, that some of these technologies might take our jobs. So I want to talk about that a little bit and give examples of the work we've done with artists. So here's some examples. When you look at robotic technology in the world today, which is developed by engineers, scientists, and designers, they take this kind of form. You either have these kind of scary industrial robotic devices like this robotic arm, or like Boston Dynamics animal-like robotics, or you have these human-like or humanoid type of robotic designs that are kind of creepy. Most people find these a bit creepy. So this is the approach that the technologists through engineering, science, and design have been taking. And I would argue that it's not the most kind of human-centric approach. Now, we work with a number of artists on bringing the best of humanity together with the best of technology. And just one example I'm going to share here is Sue Gwen Chung. And I'm going to play a video so you can hear Sue Gwen and one of our researchers, Larry O'Gorman, talk about this work. Sue Gwen is known for doing what's called drawing collaborations with robots. And through the work with Sue Gwen, we developed whole new ways of thinking about our machine vision approaches, how we analyze data from smart cities, the movement of people and traffic within a complex city like New York, and then how we can visualize that data in a more human-centric way, and how we can really have a better philosophy and ethos around taking the best of humanity with the best of technology, and it not being an either-or type of conversation. So I'll play a little bit of this from Sue Gwen's work with us.
That functions as a gesturally motion on the canvas.
When I first met Sue Gwen, I loved the line of her art. And ultimately, I don't think it's about the technology. I think that we, the technologist, facilitates the artist. And I'm learning something from them, and they're learning something from me.
What makes collaboration really interesting is that there's a lot of give and take and vulnerability that's required in it.
So to give another example, like another one of these big buzzy topics today is virtual reality and augmented reality, VR and AR. So again, to give you a sense of when we look at the technology only approach, we kind of enter this, what I describe as a digital zombie type existence, or you could think of it as a technological dystopian existence, right? So we're expected as human beings to wear these very clunky VR goggles and these clunky haptic gloves and all these kind of things. And again, I don't think this is a very human-centric approach. So we've worked with a number of artists to explore different ways and different concepts and how you can have virtual reality or augmented reality. Now, before I share the work we did with one of our artists, I want to share this kind of thought-provoking piece by this artist called Hyper Reality. This is not one of the artists we've worked with, but I wanted to share this as a way to help you understand how artists can think about the future and the intersection of technology and humanity. So this piece is called Hyper Reality.
Estoy libre de mi ira. Estoy libre de mi tristeza. Y el amor es mi
So what you're seeing there is a video capture of the real physical world, and on top of that is overlaid all of this digital content. And that's basically what augmented reality is, that you can wear some kind of glasses. As an example, you can see the physical world in front of you as you would normally, but overlaid on that you have digital content. And this artist was predicting that in a number of years from now, we will be so burdened and so oversaturated by digital content and advertising that this will be our existence. And I personally think that it's highly likely that we could enter this existence if you think about what has happened through online social media platforms to date. And this kind of worries me about how our attention and how our humanity might be monetized in this type of way. So with an artist called Lisa Park, we worked on a project called Blooming, and here the whole idea was to have a type of virtual experience that we created, but to remind people of the importance of the human condition, what it means to be human, and in particular, the importance of human touch in being human. So in this particular work, what you'll see is people enter this space, and when they physically touch, hold hands, or hug each other, the cherry blossom blooms in front of them in different ways, depending on how they touch. And we got a very positive reaction from people when they experienced this, because it reminded them of the importance of being physically close to other people.
My name is Lisa Parr. I use biometric sensors like heart rate monitors and brainwave devices to create interactive installations and do performances. Blooming is an interactive installation based on the interactions between the audience members by measuring their conductivity, their gestures, and heartbeats. The tree starts to bloom or it released the petals to the ground. So this tree becomes like a metaphor for the audience members' physical interactions to create this deep sense of connection.
Okay, let's move on. Another one of the really hyped up topics of our time is artificial intelligence, or AI for short. And again, you know, in the popular media or from a technology point of view, many people kind of think of it in terms of the Terminator concept there, where you have advanced robotics plus advanced artificial intelligence, and what kind of doom and gloom scenarios might be caused for humanity. And I really fundamentally disagree with this notion and this sentiment. I think it's completely ill-founded, and a lot of people that write about these technologies, in my view, don't really know what they're talking about, if I'm being honest. So we wanted to work with artists, and I'm going to give you one example here where we wanted to dispel this myth that AI is bad and that robotics are bad and that we're going to lose all of our jobs and these kind of things. We just fundamentally don't believe in that concept. So with this artist, and called Reeps, one is his artistic name, Harry Yeff is his real name, and Helen played a promotional clip for this documentary series that we developed with him called We Speak Music. The last 2 episodes of that documentary is where we explore the creative potential of AI. So what we did is we trained machine learning algorithms, and machine learning is one of the core technologies that enables artificial intelligence. So we trained machine learning algorithms on his voice, how to beatbox. So beatboxing, if you don't know, is where people can make their voice sound like anything or like a computer. So we trained the machine learning algorithms on his beatboxing. After a period of time, the algorithms developed a sound that kind of sound like him, but they give him back sounds and techniques that he has never done in his life. So think about that for a second. We took one of the most creative people in the world that I know, who is pushed his voice to the absolute limits and is known as one of the world's best and most progressive beatboxers, vocal experimentalists. We gave his voice, trained his voice on these machine learning algorithms, and these algorithms developed back techniques and sound that he has never done, even though he was the one that trained the technology. So think about that. The human trained the technology, but the technology developed an approach that was different to the human. And now with Harry, what we've done is developed a technique in collaboration with another company where he can live, dynamically, real-time collaborate with his digital alter ego, or what we call his second self. And what this has enabled him to do is to take his voice to a whole new level, or in fact, he calls it that he has leveled up his voice, because he thought he had reached the absolute limit of his capability for his voice. And now he's performing in new ways, composing in new ways, and he's developed sounds and techniques that he never thought of before. So this is very exciting to us to show that if you take the best of technology, in this case AI, artificial intelligence, and you bring it with the best of humanity, we can develop tools that can help improve the creativity of all human beings on the planet. And that's something that's very exciting. So I'm going to play you just maybe 1 minute of the final episode in this work called We Speak Music. And this is where we kind of show you the training between him and the artificial intelligence, and then you get to the point where he starts collaborating with this. So if you want to see all of this work in its entirety, just Google Bell Labs We Speak Music, and you can access the content on one of our web pages. So let's just play this here.
One, two, three, 4, 5. One, two, three, 4, 5. Enough for a piece of rosum. Let's listen. And for with VDM and this expression just
Okay, so for the sake of time, I'll move on because I'm really interested in us having a bit of dialogue in the Q&A. So there were some examples on some of these really critical emerging technologies: robotics, augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. And we do, a lot of our artistic collaborations are based on those emerging technologies because we are a tech company. We develop technology to connect people and to help with communication across the internet and the cellular network. But we also do a lot of work with musicians and composers. And the reason is, it's something that I forgot to mention in the slides here, but one of our research agendas, or one of our research visions in the program that I lead, is to develop ways for humans to communicate and connect on an emotional level. So to think about how you can go beyond the limitations of the spoken word and the written word with respect to emotion sharing, and how might we leverage and develop technology that emotionally connects people. So think about it, you're on a Zoom call with someone else across the world. How might you develop an emotional connection and therefore have better and deeper understanding between people? And how might that break down the barriers that exist between people all over the world? So that's one of our long-term research visions. But within that, we work with musicians and composers to try and leverage music's capability to convey and elicit emotions. So there is a language of emotion sharing already embedded within music, and the connection between music, sound, and human evolution is extremely strong. And we're trying to tap into those kind of aspects combined with aspects of neuroscience so that we can develop technologies that help people connect on an emotional level. So that's kind of the motivation. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some work we've done with artists. And in particular, in this case, there's this concept of haptic gloves, and haptics is what you get when your phone vibrates. And it's this notion that in the virtual world, it'll be very important to trigger the brain to think that it's physically present in the virtual world by triggering kind of vibrations through these gloves or your phone. And again, it's very techno-dystopian in its current approach as developed by technologists. But we've worked with the International Contemporary Ensemble and a couple of our artists here is one called Set Fluid, to understand how we can leverage the understanding of the tactical or the haptic and tactile connection and relationship between a musician and an instrument like a bassoon or any other instrument. And these instruments have typically had the same design, form, and function for hundreds of years. And with some of our artists, we're exploring alternatives to the traditional form. One, so we can explore new ways of creativity and composing and performing music, but also so we can understand on a deeper level the relationship between a person and their physical interaction with an instrument, and how we might leverage that knowledge to build more human-centric haptic devices.
Roles. I come as a humanist who's deeply interested in the nature of communication. The second is as a technologist who's trying to think about how can I decrease the friction between a thing that allows someone to be expressive and the expressive intent on the other side.
I can talk a little bit more about this project later. And then the final example I'll give in music and technology is, I spend a lot of time thinking about the way we communicate as human beings and how we have traditionally communicated in times prior to digital technology and how we communicate today. And, thinking about concepts like how can you convey true emotion or complex emotions in a text message where it might be 140 characters or less with basic emojis. And text is great for convenient exchange between other people, but it can be sometimes on a superficial level, and you can miss all of that nuance and complexity around the human condition. And you can certainly, I believe, not have the ability to convey deep emotions. So we think about something like texting as a new paradigm for communication in the digital age. And we think about online social networks where you're friends, quote unquote, with thousands upon thousands of people, versus what we're used to throughout our evolution as humans, which is to be in very close physical proximity and connection with other people. And we start thinking about, with the advent of digital technology, online social media platforms in the last 20 years, we've substantially moved away from hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. And we have to think about what negative consequences that might have. For example, the pandemic of digital loneliness is directly an artifact of this move to online friendships and social media platforms. So it's quite interesting to think about this kind of philosophically and the role that technology does play and should play in this. So With that, you know, we've been working with the International Contemporary Ensemble, who are an ensemble based out of Brooklyn. And we developed a technology internally with one of our other artists called Lainey Pfefferman. And the idea here was, how could we turn people's cell phones into loudspeakers such that they could become part of a musical performance or an artistic performance, where instead of them sitting their artist on stage and them hearing the sound being broadcast at them, that they would actually have to be able to play a role in the performance itself through their phones. So let me just play a little bit of this based on a performance we did at Times Square last year. Okay, so, you know, if you're interested in this kind of work, in general, you can just Google Nokia Bell Labs E.A.T. E.A.T stands for Experiments in Arts and Technology. And you can see the range of different types of artistic collaborations that we have developed across a range of technology, and of course, using music and composition as well. So just before we come close to the end here, I wanted to talk about this concept of humanizing technology that you might not be very familiar with. And when I think about humanizing technology, I think, excuse me, that it has to do with acknowledging human evolution, acknowledging the human condition, and understanding that we've evolved for hundreds of thousands of years to get to the point where we are today in modern society. And it's not to say we shouldn't develop technology. I'm a technologist. I love technology. And we should know that we have invented and co-evolved with technology. But at the same time, in the last 20 years, we've moved drastically away from some of those core tenets or core traits of the human condition. And I think this is one of the reasons that we're having some tensions in the world today, especially around the use of digital technology. And we as technologists have to consider how our technology might adversely, negatively affect humanity. And also you as consumers have to think about how your consumption of the technology or use of it might negatively affect you or your family or friends. So, you know, I'd ask you, anyone in the audience that is in a role of leadership or developing technology, to think about this concept of humanizing technology and think about how, you know, what harm might your technology do in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? And think about some of the core traits of the human condition and how we might actually design them into the technology that we're developing. And then this really is more for those of you that are kind of students and younger in life and yet to kind of go to college and go into the working world. I just wanted to share some thoughts that I've had, things that I wish I could have shared with my younger self, or I wish someone had shared them with me. And I think one of the most critically important ones is this concept of talking to strangers. So I grew up in a tiny village in the west coast of Ireland, 150 people maximum. Everyone there looked and sounded just like me. I was lucky that through music and through my family, I got to travel around quite a bit, and I got exposed to all of the differences around the world, and honestly, even all of the differences around a tiny little country like Ireland. So I think at a young age, I learned to talk to strangers. I learned to understand their different perspectives, and I learned to embrace those differences rather than being afraid of them. And I think it's a critically important thing for you and your growth personally and professionally when you're older, is to embrace this concept of talking to strangers and learn from strangers. And that will open up your mind and open up opportunities for you. When you get a bit older and you've maybe gone through college, or you've had your first or couple of jobs, do think about moving into different roles. Do think about applying your knowledge in one area to a different area, learning that new area. And when you do this, you will become a very special person that is able to very quickly move between roles, move between fields. You'll be able to leverage all of your experience in the previous fields and previous roles, add that to the next one that you're learning in, and you'll become kind of a specialized person that can fluidly, flexibly, adaptively move into new things And I believe the future of the skill sets that are going to be in high demand are those types of people that can move across fields like that and leverage their knowledge in previous work to the next type of work they're doing. So try and think about becoming comfortable with changing roles and moving around your skill sets quite a bit. Part of that then is to just become very comfortable with uncertainty and change. There's very few things in life that are static and stable. And honestly, we've all seen it in 2020 in particular, how much uncertainty there has been. But I can tell you in the future, that level of uncertainty and change is just going to amplify and accelerate. And I'm not talking necessarily about health pandemics. I mean, the evolution of technology and the collision of these different technologies and how our humanity is evolving through the use of technology. All of these things are kind of accelerating, and that's going to bring a lot of uncertainty and change. And if you're a type of person that can be super comfortable in that mode, again, you're going to do very well. Another critically important thing is to throw yourself on the deep end, and especially when you're a bit older, or at least personally, I found this, that if I wasn't extremely unsure how I would do a job or if I would succeed, then I found I wasn't pushing myself enough. And again, it can be very uncomfortable to be in those positions, but I have personally learned so much from throwing myself in the deep end, as the analogy goes, learning how to swim on the fly, and learning all these new skills, and being able to then get super comfortable with uncertainty. And I think this is something you have to think about, and think about embracing in your own personal life and in your professional life. One of our artists that I showed you earlier, Sugwen Chung, she has this saying, which is to go where you are rare. And what that means is to try and find these places where you think differently, you act differently, where you can be bringing your knowledge and your skills in a differentiated way to the workplace or your professional life. And think about where you can make a difference and add value in the things that you bring. And that's going to give you a lot of joy personally as you go through life. You must be in it to win it, of course. No one ever did well in anything if they weren't practicing and being part of it and being engaged and being present. And I just, kind of finish off by saying people are the key. If any of you go into technology roles, any parents that are in technology companies, I truly believe that it's critically important to understand that people are the most important thing, and everything else, algorithms, frameworks, technology, products, whatever, they're all in service of people. And this is something that I've learned throughout my career at Bell Labs. And so with that, what I'd like to do is leave plenty of time for Q&A. I'd like to thank you for taking an hour out of your time on a Friday evening. This is the latest talk I've ever been asked to give, so this is a new record for me. And I have enjoyed working with Helen and the rest of the folks at the Wharton Institute. We've worked on a couple of interesting projects together, and we hope to do more. And I hope to be able to meet and speak to all of you in due course as well. So with that, why don't we open it up to some questions?
Thank you so much. This has been just amazing. Am I still muted?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I know the questions are coming, and so I don't want to go too much into it, but I saw a couple of the questions of NJY's parents and students asking about our mentorship program that's coming up with Bell Labs and with your E.A.T program and our program. So I want to save that for kind of our info session for our students later, but maybe deal with the very first question, this human-centric. You are talking and using that terminology, but could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll explain how most people use it, and then I'll explain how I think about it, which I think is slightly different. Now, I actually did, when I talked about humanizing technology, that is my perspective of what human-centric approaches should be. So what human-centric should be is putting the human at the center, thinking about emotions and empathy, and trying to understand it from the human perspective, not just developing a technology, throwing the technology out of the world and expecting humans to use it, but to actually think about how humans should use it, how they would use it, what it means to be human, and the human's use of this technology, and think about our humanity, right? This is what I was talking about in that concept of humanizing technology. A lot of people today that develop technology forget the fact that we've evolved for hundreds of thousands of years to get where we are. And I just think that's kind of crazy to not acknowledge that. So human-centric is that's what I mean by it. Now, when people talk about human-centric design, they're typically trying to bring elements of empathy and emotion to their design considerations. So the evolution has been user-centric design, which means you split humanity up into segments. Let's just say there's 5 segments that can describe all of humanity, and then you design your product or products for those various segments. And what that basically says is, I've taken all of humanity, and I think all of humanity can be split in 5 different ways. And I'm going to design my product for one of those 5 different types of personas or type of person. Human-centric then goes the next level and says, how do we bring empathy and think about the individual into it? That's good. That's a good evolution. And then when I really talk about human-centric, I mean that plus acknowledging the human condition and our evolution and what it means physically, biologically, genetically to be humans, and acknowledge that in our technological processes and design. So that's kind of a loaded answer, but that's what I think of it.
Yeah, and I've had the privilege of sitting in some of your kind of conversations with your artists and engineers, and just kind of brainstorming what empathy means for all of us, and what that means in your work. And so I know that as a musician, that's really at the core of us trying to connect with our audience through music. And if we are not connecting either from the stage to the audience or vice versa, then we're really missing the whole point of live performance with audience. And so for New Jersey Youth Symphony folks, we have a really wonderful kind of a experimental project that's coming up. That's a 2-year project funded by the Futures Grant. And all of the questions pertaining to that high school mentorship program that's coming up just between Bell Labs and NJYS, I will address that later, just because I'm seeing a whole bunch of questions coming up for that. But the next one is, it says, thanks for the great talk. Technical question. I am familiar with deep learning and how a lot of sequence related modeling is done with architectures such as LSTMs and RNNs. Is training models for audio music processing done in a similar way by treating the audio as a sequence? All right, you lost me in the first sentence, but I know you know what you mean.
It's yes, exactly. That's exactly how it's done, and that's exactly how this project with the beatboxer, how we developed that. It was exactly an RNN, an LSTM, and we also did a style transfer technique as well. So not to go into the details of it for everyone else, but there's different types of algorithms or equations, different ways of training data. So you take data, it could be a voice, it could be visuals of people, it could be anything, could be music. That's your input, that's your data. You give that to these machine learning algorithms, and then they apply these techniques to that data to try and learn. So LSTM, long short-term memory, RNNs, and style transfer, all these kind of things are just different types. Think of them as different types of equations that enable you those machine learning algorithms to learn in different ways. That's for people that don't know what those acronyms are. And the answer again is yes, that's exactly what we used in this technique. Now, how we use them is different to most, and how we train them is different to most, and the details, the devil is in the details. But yeah, at a high level, they're the equations and algorithms we used.
Great. Next question is, did you have a favorite project? These all seem so cool. Or have there been any extremely touching, impactful projects? What are some of projects happening right now?
I don't like to say I have a favorite, but I'll mention a couple that have stood out to me. And I think the blooming one that I showed earlier, where the people physically touched, hand holding or hugging or kissing, whatever, and that motion or that experience of touch activated the blossoming of that cherry blossom. Now, the reason that stands out to me as a very interesting project is we as technologists, we would have gone down a path of these very clunky, robotic-like haptic gloves and VR goggles and everything. And when we worked with that artist, Lisa Park, on this importance of touch and thinking about haptics and how we could connect people using technology at a distance, she went in a totally different direction. And people that experienced that exhibit broke down crying. We had parents with kids crying. We had couples crying. We had complete strangers that didn't know each other get very emotional. And it was the entire design of that experience that was very compelling, but it was also the simplicity of the use of technology and that artistic perspective to say, let's not go crazy with tech. Let's not do all these crazy things with VR goggles. Let's take it back to our humanity. Let's have people just connect physically. And that's an example of the power of artistic thinking and the artistic approach, and how we as technologists seek in our program to leverage that, again, more human-centric approach. A engineer, scientist, designer, technologist never would have contemplated that approach. And that's just an example of many that I could give that have really taught me valuable lessons. And I'm a trained engineer as an example. So that was, I won't answer the favorite one, but I'll give that as an example of a very compelling project we did. Now, more recently, we've been working on projects that are very interesting, some of which haven't been shared public yet. Some are around how you bring humans into a virtual world in a much more human way. And how we can build connections over a virtual existence. So for example, it's not exactly this, but we're over a Zoom interface. And really it feels to me, and I know Helen quite well, we've met many times in person, but it feels to me like the distance between us is infinity. This is a totally different experience than when you and I are standing in the Wharton School or in the Bell Labs facility around the corner in New Providence. There's a different human dynamic. It's not the same experience at all. And all those things that uniquely make us human are lost when we connect this way. And we're doing a lot of work with artists and our technologists on how we can bring that human connection element into this type of technology. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that was really neat was, when I watched the whole video about the blooming project a while ago, I was very moved, even just as a third party watching. And I think it was the beauty that human can kind of come together to create that we can't see. And the artist was able to kind of visualize that for us. When the love kind of comes together, to see that blooming thing was really, really touching. And right now, during this pandemic, I dream of a day where we can go and experience that, because now with all this social distancing being the word, I actually just made me really feel warm at my heart looking at that clip that you shared with us. So I think it's not aesthetics, but it is the beauty that we can create that, is very, subjective, what beauty is. And I think that was really touching. All right, a couple more questions here. People say engineers lose their creativity by being so strict and logical. Do you agree with this? Personally, I enjoy music and handcrafts, but also really want to be an engineer. How can people who plan on studying going into STEM keep this human-centered part and artistic creativity throughout their work and not be so pigeonholed like you mentioned? And, STEAM, right? STEAM is the way to go.
Yeah, so there's, that's a nice question. There is an emerging type of role in industry, not just in industry, you can apply it in creative practice and cultural practice, but it's this concept of a creative technologist. So creative technologist is typically someone that has studied an undergraduate in some kind of engineering or computer science type degree, but as a hobby had their own artistic creative practice. And then they bring those two parts of their brain, if you even believe in that construct, right? But they bring those two sides of their analytical and creative practice to a particular role. And they're very special people and they're great to work with. Now there's others that did an undergraduate, and we work with an undergraduate in the humanities or the arts, and they've learned to code in their own time and they've got extremely proficient at that. And they again bring those two worlds together. Now, how do you not get pigeonholed? You try and embrace both sides of the equation or both sides of your brain, and you will try and find roles where you can take that to your day job. Now there's nothing stopping you from keeping either as a hobby on the side in your evening and weekends, but if you really want to push to the extreme and leverage the benefit of all of your thinking and your creativity and your analytical skills, try and find a role where that will be embraced. And there's many roles like that across industry, whether it's in design agencies, whether it could be in some marketing agencies, it can be lots of tech companies like ours. There's roles in academia. If you know where to look, there's a lot of opportunity for you with those interests and that skill to really do well.
Yeah, thank you for that advice. That's great. The next one says, pertaining to moving into different roles, how do you determine whether to keep specializing in one area or move to a different field? Should I pick whichever is more certain?
This is a very kind of critically important question, and unfortunately there isn't a silver bullet answer other than, what my belief in it is, it's extremely personal. And what I mean by that is there's some people, and I work with some of them, that will study in one field, work in that field, and spend their entire lives just in that field. I'll give you an example. We have some folks in Bell Labs in New Jersey that have been working their entire lifetimes on quantum computation, and they will work on that till they retire. And some of them have been 30, 40 years already working in just that one field, and they are very, very happy to stay in that field until they can't progress it any further. Now, there's others like me who I found I went deep into a field like aerodynamics, fluid dynamics, and then I had the opportunity to apply my knowledge of that to a different field, which was thermal science. And then I had the opportunity to start learning new fields, and I found that exhilarating. For me personally, I just knew that when those opportunities arose, I was going to either take them or make them. And I just knew in myself, I just knew that this was the thing that excited me. I wanted to learn and grow this way. And there's others, and prior to that, by the way, I was very happy being in the one field and learning everything I could in it. And others then are very happy spending their entire lives in it. So it's an extremely personal thing. What I would say is one of the other pieces of advice I gave was to try different things. And if you start trying different things, you'll find that you either love that learning and trying different things, and that will give you an indication of how you want to grow and go. Or you'll find that, no, I'm not happy with all these new things. I'm really happy with that thing I was doing before. And that gives you the indication that you need to go back to it. So listen to yourself, try new things, experiment, but try and always sense check as quickly and frequently as you can against yourself, and try and pay attention to what makes you happy. And you can only know that. I cannot give you the answer to that.
Well, I think you're a really amazing role model for our students because, you grew up with music. So much music as our students are, our members of New Jersey Youth Symphony, they are really driven and dedicated musicians because it's a highly selective process that they have to go through to join us. But at the same time, we know that we only have about 5% of our musicians who graduate from our program go into music. A lot of them actually go into engineering. And so there's a strong connection. But I think you coming back to cultivating that relationship between art and technology, I'm sure the way you began this talk, you talked about music, growing up. And so, I think it's a really fascinating connection and so cool to see someone who's doing that right now, like yourself. Now, so as I had said, we have a couple more questions and we will go just a few more minutes. But our New Jersey Youth Symphony is really lucky to have had this grant, and we have a partnership with Nokia Bell Labs with Domhnaill's department to kind of mentor some of our students, and we are going through this process. But the major part of that is to use this new technology using the cell phone to connect the communication, increase the communication between audience and performer. But through commissioning a brand new piece. And I have invited one of our composers who will be writing a piece for us, Patricia Molina. And Dr. Molina is asking actually, which cell phones technologies have been used for musical purposes and which ones are yet to be used? For example, LiDAR is a new cell phone technology for iPhone 12. GPS, camera, etc. are older cell phone technologies. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, like one of the most creative ways to use cell phones today is to use what's called the IMU, the Inertial Measurement Unit. And that's basically you tilt your phone and move your phone around in different orientations, and it gives out a reading of the different orientation, and then you can use that to create different sounds. So even in the technique that you mentioned where we activate the audience member's cell phones, we can allow the audience member to actually change the sounds that are coming out of the phone by moving the phone in different directions. So that's an example of a current technology that has been used more recently in creative ways. Now, you asked about emerging technologies like LiDAR, for example. I personally am not aware of anyone using LiDAR, and I think LiDAR might only just be out in the iPhone 12 Pro or maybe the iPad, the newest iPad. It's not a very common technology. It's typically a very expensive technology. So I'm not aware of it being used musically, but I know it has been used artistically, especially in creating virtual representations of a physical world or place.
Well, maybe that's something we should talk about. Dr. Molina is on the verge of starting to compose for us, and so that's a really exciting kind of possibility of talking about something new. All right, Griffin is asking, in the way that you mentioned technology has pushed humans further from what makes them human, has technology had any negative effects on art by pushing it farther from its roots?
I would say my answer to that is no, but there are some purists in the art world. If you take fine art or anything, any of those more traditional art forms, some of those folks might argue that modern art or digital art or multimedia art, they might regard it to not be true forms of art in the traditional sense. There aren't too many people that have that sentiment, though, I think, thankfully. So I believe now art is about exploring possibilities, about examining the human condition, about provoking new thought in people. And it doesn't really matter if it's new technology, old technology. Once it does that, then it's art. So yeah, my answer again to stress this is no.
All right. Stephen is asking, is machine learning vocal music similar to learning instrumental music? Are ML algorithms for symphonic music more complex than those for solo music?
No, I don't think, not particularly. I mean, there's again nuances in how they're trained and the particular equation and the weightings, in other words, the exponents on certain terms and things like that. There are nuances and lots of people have lots of different techniques, but they're pretty much all similar now. And even techniques used for visual training and visual identification can be used for audio and sonic approaches. So there's a lot of overlap and use between them. And really, depending on the problem you're trying to solve, you could use any number of them.
All right, last two. Are in integrating AR, VR into musical instruments of your own creation, this would allow a single musician to play a duet with his instrument as the technology would become the second player?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. We have not looked at that, but I like your thinking. So the idea is we have worked with other projects with an artist on visual instruments, and it was a type of machine vision technology. This guy, he was a poet, he was orating a poem. But what we wanted to do was to create a musical backdrop to his speaking such that he could create an emotional musical response to go with how he felt about the words. So normally someone orates a poem with just the words, quite stoic, static. And we wanted to bring music to that. So we tracked his movement as his hands and body and arms and everything moved through a visual scene, like you see me doing here. Live, real time, he could create a sonic ambience to represent emotionally how he felt about the words. And you can check this out online. The artist was Philip King, and he did work with us a number of years ago. So that's a type of augmented reality visual instrument. Now you could take it another level. I'm playing an actual instrument. Maybe I'm playing my piano on the keyboard. And in front of me, I have some kind of a augmented reality overlay. And maybe through the movement of my eyes intercepting that digital overlay on the physical, maybe that's a secondary instrument that creates different effects or sounds or notes or whatever. So yeah, I think that is a space that definitely is ripe for exploration. Nice idea. I think you should get working on it immediately.
I love it. And that was unfortunately asked anonymously, so I can't find out. But if you're a student, email me, please. Lastly, just for fun, do you have a fun name for people who are involved in both technology and art, like yourself? Or do you just call yourself an art technologist?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier. Creative technologist is becoming the normal term, and you can call yourself whatever you want. Art technologist is nice, but yeah, creative technologist is becoming the kind of commonplace term for that type of person.
That's great. Well, so I know that a lot of the parents and students are so looking forward to an opportunity to even visit Nokia Bell Labs, and we are literally 2 blocks away from you physically, New Jersey Youth Symphony. But I know your official internship for perhaps high school students and college, that's only really through the summertime. And so I'm going to just ask some practical questions here. One last one. Could you just talk about the prerequisite and the type of students that you're looking for that? And also NJYS families here and students, the work that we're going to be doing through Futures Fund for this year and next year, it is not an official internship because we don't do programs throughout the summer. This will be kind of a mentorship program where we will create a space for discussions and very pointed work on our brand new piece that we will compose, we will commission, and then we will work with the engineers, use the cell phone technology, and hopefully when the pandemic is over, or even outdoors in May, we hope to perform this piece with some sort of a help from the technology to increase the relationship between audience and the performer. So maybe talk to us a little bit about the internship.
Yeah, so the official internship is a summer internship that takes place for 10 weeks, roughly at the start of the summer till 10 weeks later, whatever that is, middle of August, so early June to middle of August. There are internships across all of the different research areas in Bell Labs, not just our program, but wireless communication, optics, photonics, electronics, computer science, quantum, you name it, right? Anything you can imagine in the sciences that are important for human communication using technology. We have research in New Jersey on that, and also not just in New Jersey, but in California and in Chicago and in all over the world. So the application process, in fact, I think the roles, most of them are probably live online at the moment. If you Google search Nokia Bell Labs summer internship, you should be brought to a site that will list all of them. And the typical requirements are we typically seek PhD candidates, so students that are currently in a PhD program across any of those disciplines. They can come from any school, anywhere, through the application process. There are a number of universities that we work with kind of historically, strategically, we have strong partnerships with, and we know the professors and we might know the students, and they can, they might have preference over the internships purely because of that relational basis. But we bring in students every year from universities we've never worked with before, with professors we've never worked with. So there's a lot of opportunity there to enter into that program. We do bring in undergraduate interns as well. It doesn't have to be PhD only. The preference is PhD because of the type of intensive research we do. But we have brought in many undergraduate students that have done very well. In fact, some of them have done better than the PhD students, honestly. So I personally like working with the undergraduates because they have a lot of energy, and the process of doing a PhD hasn't deterred them yet.
So I know that there's sometimes you have a group of high schoolers come and different STEM programs visit you. And so if you want to, I think for students, visit your STEM or STEAM department in your high school and see if you can get in touch with Nokia Bell Labs and do kind of a group visitation and lectures and things like that. Well, thank you so much. It is 10 after 8, but I felt like, we needed to answer all of the questions, and I'm sure that this will continue. And I just want to thank you so much for your time and coming in and talking to us this late in the day. I know you have a young boy at home, and you probably missed his bedtime. And so we really appreciate that. And for being such an amazing role model and bringing arts and technology together and opening up this phenomenal world of intersection. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate our collaboration and hope we can do more. So thanks to everyone for staying up late on a Friday.
Thank you so much. And everyone, it is every Friday night for the 4 more weeks that we have webinars on here and also live on YouTube. Next week we have a composer, a Peruvian composer, who has written a brand new piece for us and for NJYS to premiere in February, called La Frontera, Movement in Migration. And it is a personal story, a 17-minute piece in 4 movements with dancers, percussion quartet, and string octet, and singer and a guitarist. And so we will talk about kind of the background information and as to how all of that gets put together, from commissioning all the way to premiering. So we hope that you will join us, and you can visit us on whartonarts.org for more information. And you can see this very presentation on our whartonarts.tv. So it will be there for a while. So if you missed it and if you wanted to share with another student, please do so. And be safe out there and take care. Thank you, and we'll see you next Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.